Hello and welcome to the first episode of the Kitchen Sink Podcast. I'm Jesse Marsh. So excited you're here. Today we have Dillon Taylor, the Chief of Staff for the Virginia Department of Emergency Management. A busy guy right now, but took some time out of his day to talk to me. We talk about our chair's experiences in emergency medicine and in firefighting and how we apply those different techniques and tactics that we learned there into our jobs today. Hope you enjoy it. All right, Dillon, well, thanks so much for joining me on the first episode of the Kitchen Sink Podcast. You're a brave soul for agreeing to do this.
Yeah, I appreciate the invite. My goal is to set a low bar so anyone else that comes after I can do nothing but beat that performance.
Well, I think the good thing here is there's probably going to be 5 or 6 people that watch this, so I think we're okay. This being the first episode, I'm really excited to have you on. I think we have a really good similar background with emergency services and leading. I actually wore my Sparta ambulance shirt today.
I saw that. I like it.
Yeah, just for today. So it'd be really great to hear a little bit more about you, your current role, and then we'll dive into a little bit about how you got there.
Yeah, perfect. So Dillon Taylor, work here in Richmond, Virginia. I'm the Chief of Staff and Senior Counsel at the Virginia Department of Emergency Management, currently helping support Hurricane Ian activations in Florida and then preparing here in the Commonwealth. I've been here about 4.5 years and previously was in Southern Arizona and bounced around a little bit before we got down here, but been here for about 4.5 years now.
Great. In terms of your day-to-day when you're not in crisis mode, what does the Chief of Staff and Senior Counsel at a department like yours do on a day-to-day basis?
So if you can imagine all the things that go into running any organization, depending on its, whether it's a really small team or a very large, complex organization, a Chief of Staff's role is to kind of like connect all the dots and see the big picture. And so it's pretty similar for what I do in that space. So I oversee a team that includes diversity, opportunity, inclusion, facilities, fleet safety, communications, project management, and government affairs. And then, so our team then is kind of the connective tissue around the agency. And then really just kind of supporting, my two principals are number one and number two in the agency. And then just acting as that person that brings people to the table so that we can get the big things up on the table and address whatever that issue can be. So you can call it fighting fires, but it really is just making sure that things run smoothly and that people are talking. And I know it seems very elementary, but when you break it down to the basic pieces, the basic parts, it really is just making sure people are connected and that they have the information and shared consciousness to go forth and conquer in whatever that is, whether it's buying a new vehicle or, repatriating 70,000 Afghans within 24-hour notice last year.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I think what is interesting, and I've experienced similar being part of, not obviously not on the same scale as you, but being part of different EMS organizations and how important it is to have that intercommunication of different branches or different assets to all work together. It's harder than you think. I mean, not you obviously, but it's difficult to kind of wrangle the cats in a way and get everybody on the same page. So I totally respect your role. And in terms of how we met, it was great. I mean, we were both at a conference called Solid last week, talking about legal operations and how legal departments are run. And you did a great job on a panel of 4 or 5 different chief of staffs for legal departments. Yours obviously being the most interesting. And it was very clear that everybody in the audience was excited to have you there to provide a different perspective, which I appreciate. I think the emergency services perspective into the regular legal world is fascinating. Those were the key takeaways that I had. What did you take away from that conference?
No, I appreciate the chance to connect. I know you reached out beforehand, and I think that we had a kind of instant kinship, given your background in my background. The part that I took from that was that regardless of what industry you're in, or what agency or law firm or consulting group or sales team whatever that is. The part that I really took from it was that people are really dedicated to figuring out how to serve their clients better. And then it was the internal focus of how are we structuring our work, whether it's to be more efficient, right, for the clients, or more efficient and accommodating for our internal teammates, right, because that directly impacts our clients in the long run. So that was the part that really stood out. I was like, oh wow, like I also coming from, I talked about like a blue collar background, have a little bit of imposter syndrome, transitioning from the fire department to law school. And then you hear these kind of like, these big, big name attorneys and law firms. And then when you kind of strip all that away and titles and locations, it's about people trying to help people. And whether it's your
Yeah.
internal, external people, that's what stood out.
Yeah, and listen, man. I know we spoke at the conference and afterwards about imposter syndrome and about backgrounds in emergency services and finding fulfillment in non 911 work. I think it can be difficult. Um, but yeah, no, I was equally shocked to see how many hands went up in this room full of powerful people when
Yeah.
the speaker asked, how many people here have imposter syndrome. I think it's just super duper common. And like I told you, I've gone through quite a bit of like hypnotherapy and
Yeah.
different things to try to address that. So I get it, man. It's hard when you're. I mean, and I think everybody feels that way to a certain extent. But I also understand coming from a background that's not sales or being a chief of staff for a large department to then be thrown into that role and like, well, what am I doing here? How am I qualified to be doing this? So it's
That's right.
it's wild.
And I wonder if there's an element of imposter syndrome that people that feel, or maybe that they don't recognize their success, or what outward indicators of success would look like. Because of the imposter syndrome, you're still kind of striving for what that next thing looks like. And,
Yeah.
and maybe the opposite of that is you don't have imposter syndrome, but you're very aware of your successes. So I'm just wondering if there's a certain type of person that's prone to wanting to achieve more while at the same time not really recognizing uh, how much they've already achieved in their lives, because it's like you hear some of these folks that are, like you said, like these big named partners, equity partners in some of these big law firms, and they had their hands up, and it's like, gosh, if they if they have imposter syndrome, then what really is imposter syndrome other than a symptom of a similar type of person on a journey, in a similar path.
Yeah, no, it's so true. And even going through that hypnotherapy, that's ultimately what it was recognizing what success means, and like defining what matters, and like you said, identifying achievement in yourself, which is hard to do. I'm a big hype guy. Like I'll hype you up all day. I'll hype, I hype
That's
you up
great.
enough to get you to do this. So the I'm a it's really strange how it's very easy to see the success in others, but
Yeah.
sometimes it can be really difficult to see your own success.
Yeah.
Even
No,
someone in a similar role or doing the same thing, it's like, well, they're so successful and I'm just as successful, but you don't necessarily feel that way.
yeah. No, I agree completely.
Yeah, what I think is most fascinating about your journey through law school and into the role that you're in, um, you were 10 years on the job, right? As a firefighter, that's halfway to retirement.
Yeah.
You're like a decade away, being in your what mid 40s, retired, start your second job, and you chose to leave the fire department, go to law school, and then ultimately end up in your role. What ultimately kicked you out the door of the fire department and to start applying?
Yeah, it really is one of those. I can't really put kind of like a finger on exactly what that, like the genesis of the desire to try something new, but I'd always been really interested in, what is the next thing I can get involved in the fire department. So it was, as soon as I was able to, after my probationary year that every firefighter, EMS provider goes through, I was allowed to test for other, opportunities. So I was on the special operations team, hazardous materials technician, technical rescue technician. I had a chance to travel, and then I started to promote. So I am uh, not the best with quick math in the middle of the night when you're having to figure out kilograms to body weight and trying to do all the
Mm-hmm.
conversions. So I was like, well, let's just try I like driving big trucks. That sounds fun.
Yeah.
Um, so I was always kind of like looking for the next thing. And then I got really involved in our local IAFF chapter, and something really big in the fire service over the last 10 or 15 years, more so for decades prior to, but the data really started um, to point to some pretty obvious signs of on the job cancer.
Hmm.
And so Arizona at the time, that's where I was from, outside Tucson, was really pushing to get some cancer presumption. So it would presume if you got certain types of cancer, you got it on the job. And then it just so happens that the two of the guys I worked with, my colleagues, one of whom I went in my academy with, they got cancer, and it was one of the cancers that should have been covered. And the idea that you had to go back and prove where you got it from after you've been on the job for 20 or 30 years, there's no way, right? So, um, to your point earlier, you get on the job, some of these kind of blue collar trades, pretty early on, police, fire, military, EMS. Uh, you're able to retire in your early 40s, early 50s, or late 40s, early 50s. In my case, I would have been 40 when I retired, or 39. Uh, and a significant portion of folks are getting cancer. So that was to me very interesting. And the folks that were kind of like our first responders were the attorneys that were helping lead that charge. So I thought that was really interesting. I think it was kind of, I've used this word before, serendipity. I was off work for a surgery and decided, just I had some time to finally sleep and catch up, and I didn't feel like a zombie. And so I started reading a lot, and I went back and finished my degree in that time, and then just kind of wanted something different. And I looked at FEMA. Um, I was looking at different options, and I saw that, hey, you can have 7 years of experience or a JD. I didn't really know what
Hmm.
that meant. So I started looking into it, and I kind of caught the bug of let's try something new. Absolutely loved the job. So yeah, I had started my 10th year a couple weeks before I left and moved cross country. I worked for the firefighters headquarters in DC that summer before law school, and then started my first year at Fordham. And it was it couldn't have been a more drastic change in
Hmm.
the types of conversations that you have, on a cruise ship in the Hudson River with folks that have different backgrounds than where I came from. So it was a pretty stark talk about imposter syndrome. I would just nod my head and just act like I knew what they were
Sure,
talking
I
about.
get that. Yeah, that's really great. I think I definitely see that in myself too, wanting to do something different, constantly striving for the next thing, whether that's on the job or not on the job. So I love your background, and I think that story is inspiring not only for me, which I'm clearly inspired by it, but for folks out there that are doing something they're not thrilled to be doing, or they think they can do something different, or and the older we get, I know you and I talked a lot about this. The more it seems impossible
That's
to
right.
to completely abandon your career,
Right.
start fresh, but you were 10 years on the fire department. I have friends that have gone to medical school in their 30s, so it's totally possible, and it's worth the risk in a lot of ways. Um, I always say, like, doctors go to medical school, lawyers go to law school, and salespeople go to high school. So it's I don't
That's
know if that's
awesome.
necessarily fair. I know a lot of really smart salespeople, um, but
So
yeah, it's
I did sales for 2 weeks, and yeah, I worked for a sales company, a software company outside of Tucson. And I remember it was politely told to me that maybe this isn't a good fit for me,
yeah.
because I was actually recommending another client's product because our product at the time didn't really serve their needs. So it just made sense.
Sure.
Like, hey, let's just be open and honest. And this other, hey, if they don't like it, but at least we're being honest and they'll come back to us. I
Right.
don't think that fit their sales strategy. So it was very, I was not fired, but I just was told that maybe sales is not a good, a good aspect, at least under that sales strategy.
I can think of a couple sales managers that would probably want to say the same thing, the same thing to
Yeah,
me.
that's right.
I guess I've lasted through the years.
But no,
Um,
you have the personality, and I think that you have. I think people that are successful in sales, I think are people that are successful in fundamentally just relationships, right? Like, you make relationships with people, and it just so happens you have a service that you can provide that can help with whatever their issue is.
yeah.
And so I think right off the bat, that's something in your background in EMS. you have to establish that relationship, immediately, right? With no other context than I'm here to
Yeah.
help, right? It's got to translate into how you pursue and see sales, because you build a relationship quickly with people, and they can
Right.
trust you. And then that is just a natural segue into like, hey, I know we already have a relationship, but, and then you get into the sales part of whatever your service is or software that you're, a product that you're selling. But it's
Yeah.
not a sale. It's, hey, I'm providing a service to you because I understand where you're coming from.
That's the goal. That's always the goal, is to put myself in whoever I'm selling to shoes and understanding what they need. And there's a lot of sales methodology out there that I think is really interesting. But one of those is, nobody likes to be sold to. Totally,
That's
that is
right.
a factual statement. I think that the job of a good salesperson is to help your person that you're working with buy however it is they need to
Oh, I like
buy
that.
rather
Right.
than imposing yourself and trying to manipulate. I've never wanted to do that. I've never, done that. And it's been, I think, a good thing. Building relationships with people over the long term is far more important. And I think that's why I love sales so much. Is it's just so much fun to talk to different, like my job is to talk to people. I do it all the time for free. But although we were talking about at the conference about going on a cruise and how when you talk for a living, the last thing you want to do is sit at
That's
a
right.
table with 15 people you don't know on vacation.
Yeah, you got to charge. You got to recharge. Like, and there's some people that that you and I both know that just they're energizer bunnies. Like one of my best
Yeah.
friends I grew up with. I don't think he sleeps more than 2 hours a night. And I mean, realistically, he would wake up and it's like he had just taken, drink 10 Red Bulls. And
Yep.
for me, it's like I need to recharge. Just need, 1 or 2 nights here or there just to kind of not talk to anybody. Um, and that's hard too when you have a relationship and you have a spouse and you have kids, right, that need that time and they need that connection. So it does become a challenge when you are in a space where you do talk a lot,
Mhm.
whether people want you to or not.
Yeah.
You're in
Right.
a
I think that's half of it. No, totally true. I get it. It's weird, to even think that this is a career is just talking to people. But uh, one of the last pieces I want to talk. I know you're busy going through hurricane relief and helping out all sorts of people, but there's obviously leadership lessons and life lessons that you can learn in the fire department or EMS and some emergency response department that translates into other jobs. So you mentioned specifically building rapport quickly. I, it's so funny. I've gone through this stuff with the imposter syndrome and about uh, working through that. But I have no problem walking into someone I don't know's house
yeah,
and helping them with their most life threatening problem without batting an eye. Like to me, that doesn't add up. Like it's
that's
like
right.
I've that is the most serious situation that anyone could possibly be in, and you build instant rapport. I think personally, I think that comes from a position of authority. Like you're just about yourself. Like you understand, I am in this role. These are the shoes I have to fill, whether I want to fill them or not. And it's more
Right.
important that I make the person that I am helping feel more comfortable than my own comfort. So
Right.
that's my roundabout way of understanding those feelings. But so that's a key one for me is that I brought that in like life perspective. It's for you it's a little bit different. People are, you do have people's lives in your hands, but for me and for lots of other people, it's not life and death. And I think that when you can separate out some of those emotions that getting wrapped up in the end of the quarter or the end of the year or all these superficial things that are important, and I don't think that they aren't important. I think it's important that we hit financial goals as a company or I hit my own personal financial goals. Those are important, but they're not as important as someone that's dealing with a life-threatening injury or is on their deathbed. So for me, it's very easy to separate that for better or for worse, right? Like I don't know if that's always benefited me to have this ability to separate myself from the situation in a lot of ways. So those are my two. Do you have anything that you've experienced in the fire department that's helped you in your current role?
Yeah. So when we were chatting about it before, I've been thinking a lot about, because I think we take these things with us and then they kind of shape who we are. And then there's not too many times where you just kind of like sit back and reflect. Okay, what are the things that actually can say I've taken and then incorporated into who I am or a style, of leadership. I think the biggest part that's, as I've been thinking about this, is the ability or desire really to put other people first. I think
Hmm.
anyone that's in a public service type job, especially EMS providers, fire department, police, military, um, you're signing up with the knowledge and willingness to put your life on the line for other people. The men and women next to you, but also members of your community you've never met before, and to do it in a moment's notice and to walk in. Um, to walk in, assess the situation, and be willing to give your life for another person. And I think you know to go and our ability to impact life and death here in our agency at the state is more removed than where you and I were before, showing up to people's
Hmm.
houses. But I still think there's an element of we put others first, right? We're willing to sacrifice our own health, sometimes mental health, for long hours, to meet the needs of people you never met before. So to me, I think that that part really stands out. And I think the other part is I like the perspective. I was going to touch on that piece. I do think perspective is a really big one. Uh, and I think the other part is like I think the ability to understand exactly where you are and what's going on. And I know that seems kind of really like, oh yeah, duh, that seems really simple. But we get in the habit of, every department uses a different term, but we had CAN reports. It was conditions, actions, and needs. So where are you? What are you doing? And what do you need? And you constantly are doing that. You're constantly checking in, and you're seeing what's coming next. What am I doing right now that's going to impact this thing here? What's the cascading or unintentional impacts of that action? Who are the other people outside or on the roof that are doing their jobs that I need to incorporate into my planning? And what do I need? And so I think for leaders, there's a big difference between managers and leaders. They are not synonymous. But I think leaders have a really good ability, regardless of where you got it from, to incorporate it into your skill set. The ability to understand where are you, where are we, where are we currently now? Like you said, your Q4 numbers, where are we? What are we doing? And then what do we need to do? Or what resources do we need? So I think that fundamentally plays into strategic planning, understanding the resource allocation, opportunities for your team. What are the gaps and hurdles? Um, so I think it's one of those where it seems very, very simple in the moment, but when you apply it kind of at scale across an organization or across a team, um, it just shows that there's these things you learn in emergency services that can translate, you know, to other areas that have nothing to do with that.
Yeah, I get that, and I appreciate it. I think, yeah, I think it's natural, even if you're not in an emergency role, but you have it in the past, is to, like you said, put others first and worry about the people that you work with. I think I've always been that way. I think just from needing to take care of people after calls that have gone sideways, or looking out for other people's needs and emotions, because the consequences are so great if you don't. At
Right.
least for, you and I have both experienced people that have unfortunately committed suicide from some of the things that they're dealing with and haven't gotten the care they need for their PTSD or whatever else they're dealing with. But I tend to carry that into all aspects of my life, even if it's not as severe. So people in my current office or in my past job is very quick to be honest and open about how I feel and ask them how they feel, and try not to mask it. I think that's the most dangerous thing you can do, is uh, not encourage people to speak their mind and get it off their chest so that they don't take it home with them. So I think that's another key piece of the puzzle that I've incorporated from those EMS days that resonates, I think, with people overall.
Yeah, I agree. You and I talked about seeking therapy, seeing really hard calls, and our friends and colleagues, and sometimes our family members that are unwilling to recognize that it doesn't mean you're any less strong. It's not going to change you fundamentally as a person. The way it was always equated to me was we wouldn't think a police officer is any less brave um, by wearing, the bulletproof vest. Right,
Mm-hmm.
taking it off doesn't make you, um, you know, that much better, and wearing it doesn't make you a coward. So,
Sure.
and there's been, I find I love it every time I see the commercial. It's a guy at the gym, and he has too much weight on the bench press and he can't lift it up. And a guy comes over and says, "Hey, can I help you get that off? Put that up." He's like, "No, no, I got it." And he just sits there and struggles with it, and he can't put it down, but he can't lift it high enough to get it off him. And I
Sure.
think it's like the perfect example. It's like um, you gotta be willing to accept the help. But I think that's also, the recognition that some people just don't even know they don't even know what the feelings are they're feeling to even
Hmm.
know that help is what they need, right? It can be such a struggle internally of like, why am I feeling this way? And I think that's the part, in emergency services, and you have such a tight bonds, in the fire department, EMS, and police, and fire, and military, that you see horrible things, the worst things people could ever imagine. And then, one of the things I was thinking through is like just the power of food, and your stuff's called kitchen sink, and I stood out as the corollary to the kitchen table, right? And
Sure.
the ability to come back after a rough call, and whether anyone would ever call it group therapy, when you're sitting there, having a meal at 2 a.m., on your whatever 15th call, 10th call of the day, second call of the day, um, and to just break bread and smile and tell a joke and connect. No one would ever say that's group therapy, but that ultimately is what it is. But I think there's such this like there. I think we're much better as a as a culture and society in being okay to talk about it. Our agency, we're very open with it. We
Yep.
had a mental health day where we stood down. We stood down for a day and we focused on mental health. We procured a Headspace mindfulness app for every employee. Our first Friday of every month is very purposeful and very intentional, where we try to have open calendar space so our teams can connect as humans. So I think it's incumbent on people who've had those experiences and have come through it on the other side to make room for people who haven't yet discovered how to talk about it, to
Hmm.
have the space and the grace to be able to do so.
Totally respect that. And I think that is absolutely something that you and I are both passionate about. And I'm sure we'll continue to talk and bring in other people that could be experts on the topic or offer a different perspective. But yeah, I agree. I think the more people that talk about it, the better off we'll all be. It's hard to. It's hard sometimes to put yourself out there. I think you and I both feel that way, even about this podcast. It's uncomfortable, but in a way, it's actually, you tell everybody else, but I sent you a message today, like don't back out. Like I know I don't want to do it either, but let's it's comfort in numbers or comfort with people you know and respect just because of shared experiences. So I'm gonna let you get back to saving the Commonwealth of Virginia. Really do appreciate your time, um, and we'll talk again soon.
Yeah, likewise, man. I appreciate it.
All right, brother. Talk to you later.